Humes High School in Memphis, Tennessee, wasn't known for producing celebrities in the early 1950s. It was a working-class school in a working-class neighborhood where most students came from families struggling to make ends meet during the post-war years. Among those students was Elvis Aaron Presley, who enrolled in 1948 and would graduate in 1953, largely unnoticed by his peers and certainly not predicted for greatness. Elvis didn't fit in at Humes High. He was different in ways that made him a target for ridicule and exclusion. While other boys wore their hair in crew cuts, Elvis grew his hair longer and slicked it back with rose oil and Vaseline, a style borrowed from the truck drivers and musicians he admired. While other students wore simple, practical clothes, Elvis showed up in outfits his mother Gladys had altered to be more colorful and distinctive. Pink shirts and pegged pants that marked him as someone trying too hard to stand out. The other students noticed, and they weren't kind about it. Trashy. That was the word they used most often. Elvis Presley was trashy. His clothes were trashy. His hair was trashy. The way he talked was trashy. Everything about him screamed poor white trash trying to be something he wasn't. The football players mocked him in the hallways. The popular girls giggled when he walked by. Even some teachers looked at him with barely concealed disapproval, as if his very presence in their classroom was an affront to educational standards. Elvis dealt with the rejection by becoming even more visible, even more different. If they were going to mock him anyway, he might as well give them something to mock. He started carrying his guitar to school, which was almost unheard of. Nobody brought guitars to Humes High, but Elvis did, keeping it in his locker, sometimes playing it during lunch in the courtyard while other students stared and whispered. Not everyone at Humes High dismissed Elvis as trashy or weird. A few teachers recognized something beneath the strange clothes and unusual hair, something that suggested depth and potential that most teenagers didn't possess. Mrs. Oletta Grimes, who taught history, noticed that Elvis was genuinely interested in learning, asked thoughtful questions, and had a sensitivity that stood out among the rough-and-tumble teenage boys who dominated the hallways. But the most important teacher in Elvis's life at Humes was Mrs. Mildred Scrivener, who taught music appreciation and directed the school choir. Mrs. Scrivener was in her 50s, a classically trained musician who'd given up a potential concert career to teach in Memphis public schools because she believed that music could save lives, could give purpose to young people who otherwise might be lost to poverty, violence, or despair. When Elvis first showed up in Mrs. Scrivener's music class in his sophomore year, she didn't know what to make of him. He couldn't read music. His knowledge of theory was non-existent. But when she asked him to sing, something extraordinary happened. His voice had a quality she'd never heard before, a blend of styles that shouldn't have worked together, but somehow did. After class one day, Mrs. Scrivener asked Elvis to stay behind. "Have you ever thought about performing?" she asked. Elvis looked uncomfortable. "People don't like when I sing. They think it's weird." "People often don't like what they don't understand," Mrs. Scrivener said. "But that doesn't make it wrong. That sometimes means it's new. And new things are what change the world." She encouraged Elvis to participate in the school talent shows, to join the school choir, to keep developing his unique style rather than trying to conform. "Don't try to be what they expect," she told him. "Be what you are. The right people will recognize it eventually." In April 1953, during Elvis's senior year just weeks before graduation, Humes High held its annual Minstrel Show, a student variety performance that was a big event in the school's social calendar, and one of the few times when the whole community came together to celebrate student talent. Mrs. Scrivener convinced Elvis to participate, to sing in front of the entire student body and their families, believing that public performance would either cure him of his musical dreams or confirm that he had something genuinely special. Elvis was terrified. Performing for strangers at school functions was one thing, but performing for his peers, for the students who mocked him daily, for the teachers who looked at him with disapproval, that was something entirely different and far more frightening. But Mrs. Scrivener believed in him, and he didn't want to disappoint the one adult in his life outside his family who seemed to think he had potential. he agreed to perform. The night of the Minstrel Show, Elvis was scheduled near the end of the program, which meant he had to wait backstage for over an hour listening to other students perform, hearing the applause and laughter from the audience, feeling his anxiety build with each passing minute. He stood backstage in his carefully chosen outfit, a pink shirt and black pants that he thought made him look sophisticated, but that he feared others would mock. He held his guitar with sweating hands, trying to remember the lyrics to the song he'd planned to perform, trying to calm the panic rising in his chest. When his name was finally called, Elvis walked onto the stage of the school auditorium with legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. The audience, packed with students, parents, teachers, and community members, went quiet as he took his position at the microphone. Then, as Elvis stood there under the bright lights adjusting his guitar, whispers started. Giggles. He could hear snippets of commentary from students in the front rows, their voices carrying in the quiet auditorium. Look at what he's wearing. Is that a guitar or toy? This is going to be hilarious. Why does his hair look like that? Elvis had planned to sing a ballad, something safe and conventional that wouldn't draw too much attention or criticism. But standing there on that stage, feeling the mockery washing over him like a physical force, feeling the eyes of everyone who'd ever dismissed him burning into his skin, something shifted inside him. He thought about what Mrs. Scrivener had said to him so many times. Don't try to be what they expect. Be what you are. The right people will recognize it eventually. Even if those people aren't here tonight, even if they never come, you still have to be yourself. Because pretending to be someone else will kill your soul faster than any amount of rejection. He launched into an up-tempo version of Till I Waltz Again With You, a current hit, but he didn't perform it the way it was supposed to be performed. He moved differently, felt the rhythm in his whole body, let the music dictate how he stood and swayed. It was instinctive, unplanned, just Elvis being Elvis. The audience reaction was mixed and immediate. Some students started laughing, pointing at his movements, his intensity, the way he seemed to lose himself in the performance. But others went quiet, watching with genuine interest. And when Elvis finished, something unexpected happened. The applause was loud, sustained, split between mocking clapping and genuine appreciation. Elvis walked off stage, unsure if he'd succeeded or failed. Students came up to him afterward, some congratulating him, others making jokes. "What was that?" one football player asked, laughing. "You looked like you were having a seizure." But Mrs. Scrivener found Elvis in the hallway after the show. She had tears in her eyes. "That was extraordinary," she said. "You did exactly what I told you to do. You were yourself. And some people loved it and some people hated it, but nobody was indifferent. That's what matters." Despite Mrs. Scrivener's encouragement, the Minstrel Show performance didn't make Elvis popular at Humes High. If anything, it cemented his status as the weird kid who didn't fit in. Students who'd ignored him before now actively mocked him. The way he'd moved on stage became a running joke. People would imitate him in the hallways, gyrating and making exaggerated faces, laughing at their own impressions. Elvis graduated from Humes High in June 1953. His yearbook photo shows a young man with slicked back hair and an uncertain expression, looking like he's not quite sure he belongs in the frame. There's no caption predicting greatness, no indication that anyone at the school thought Elvis Presley would amount to anything special. After graduation, Elvis took a job at Crown Electric Company, driving a truck and delivering supplies. He was doing exactly what everyone expected a kid like him to do, following the path laid out for poor boys from North Memphis. But he kept his guitar, kept singing, kept believing that somehow, someday, music would be more than just a hobby. In 1954, less than a year after graduating from Humes High, Elvis walked into Sun Records and recorded "That's All Right." The song became a regional hit. By early 1955, Elvis was performing regularly, building a following, becoming known across the South as someone special, someone different, someone who didn't sound or move like anyone else. In October 1955, 2 years after graduating, Elvis returned to Humes High as part of a benefit concert. By then, he'd had several hit records, had appeared on the Louisiana Hayride radio show, was starting to become famous beyond Memphis. The school asked him to perform at a fundraising event, and Elvis agreed immediately. The Humes High auditorium was packed. Every student who'd mocked him, every teacher who'd dismissed him, every person who'd called him trashy was in that audience. But now they weren't laughing. They were there to see Elvis Presley, the boy from their school who'd somehow become a star. Elvis stood on the same stage where he'd performed at the Minstrel Show 2 years earlier. But everything was different now. He wore flashy clothes with confidence. He held his guitar like it was part of his body. And when he started performing, the audience went wild. The same students who'd laughed at his movements were now screaming for more. The same girls who'd giggled when he walked down the hallways were now trying to rush the stage. Mrs. Scrivener was in the audience that night, watching her former student command the crowd with absolute authority. After the show, Elvis found her backstage. "You were right," he told her. "They just needed time to understand." "No," Mrs. Scrivener said. "They needed you to become so undeniably good that they couldn't ignore you anymore." There's a difference. The Humes High performance became legendary in Memphis. It was proof that the weird kid, the one everyone had dismissed, had been special all along. The students who'd mocked him would spend the rest of their lives telling people, "I went to school with Elvis Presley," conveniently forgetting that they'd called him trashy and laughed at his performances. Elvis never forgot his time at Humes High. In interviews throughout his career, he'd occasionally reference those years, the feeling of being different, of not fitting in, of being mocked for the very things that would later make him famous. He understood what it felt like to be dismissed, to be told you weren't good enough, to have people laugh at your dreams. That understanding shaped how Elvis treated others. He was known for being kind to fans, especially young people, especially those who seemed like outsiders. He remembered what it felt like to be on the outside looking in, and he never wanted to make anyone else feel that way. Mrs. Scrivener remained a teacher at Humes High until her retirement in 1968. She kept a scrapbook of Elvis's career, every newspaper clipping, every magazine cover, every mention of her former student. She never claimed credit for his success, but she knew she'd played a role. She'd seen something in him when others saw only strangeness. She'd encouraged him to be himself when everyone else wanted him to conform. When Mrs. Scrivener died in 1973, Elvis sent flowers to her funeral with a note that read, "You taught me that being different wasn't wrong. You saved my life. Thank you." The students who'd laughed at Elvis at Humes High learned a lesson, though most of them didn't realize it until years later. They learned that the people we mock, the ones who don't fit in, the ones who seem strange or different, might be the ones who change the world. They learned that conformity is easy, but greatness requires the courage to be yourself, even when everyone is laughing. Today, Humes High School is no longer an active school. The building was closed in 2007 and has since been converted into apartments. But the legacy of Elvis's time there lives on. There's a marker outside the building noting that Elvis Presley graduated from Humes in 1953. Tours of Memphis music history always include a stop at the old school. But the real legacy isn't in markers or tours. It's in the lesson that Elvis's story teaches. That the weird kid in class, the one who dresses differently and listens to different music and doesn't quite fit in, might be seeing something the rest of us don't understand yet. That mockery and exclusion might say more about us than about the person we're mocking. That greatness often comes from the people who refuse to conform, who insist on being themselves even when it's hard, even when they're alone. Elvis Presley was called trashy at Humes High School. He was mocked for his clothes, his hair, his music, his very existence. But he didn't let that mockery define him. He took the rejection and used it as fuel, as proof that he was onto something different, something the world wasn't ready for yet. 2 years after graduating, he returned to that same school as a star, not to gloat, not to shame the people who'd dismissed him, but to prove something to himself. that the boy they'd laughed at was real, that his dreams weren't foolish, that being different wasn't a weakness but a strength. The high school where Elvis was called Trashy became part of his origin story, proof that even the greatest among us start somewhere humble, somewhere difficult, somewhere that tests whether we believe in ourselves enough to keep going when everyone else says we're wrong. And Elvis kept going. From Hume's High to Sun Records to worldwide fame, he kept being himself, kept trusting that what made him different was what made him special. Mrs. Scrivener knew it first. The world figured it out later. But Elvis always knew it in his heart, even on the days when the mockery hurt most. He was born to do something different, and no amount of laughter from people who didn't understand could change that fundamental truth.